and I'm going to hit that. So let me go back to my personal gallery view and get everybody here. So what I want to do for your introduction this time is we go around. I'd like you to introduce yourself, but I'd like you to just tell me one person who's helped you in this profession for you. It doesn't, and we don't have to know who that is, but tell us what that one person's name is and one thing that they helped you with. And when I mean one thing, not like a whole 10 minutes on that, but just kind of something they helped you see. So starting with Billy Weeks, tell us who that person is and a little about where you are and all.
Okay, well, I'm Billy Weeks. I live in Ringo, Georgia, which is a few minutes outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. So let's see. Well, I've had so many help me throughout my years, but I guess I would have to say Phil Smith was probably incredibly valuable to me. He allowed me to fail gracefully early in my career. He was my chief photographer, and he allowed me to fail gracefully, and then picked me up when I failed, and then took me to lunch, bought me lunch, and then eventually told me what I did wrong, and was very much to the point about that. I am so grateful that somebody would just tell me what I needed to do better. So.
Oh, thanks. Julie, you're next up here on my list.
Well, I think one person that helped me a lot in the last months is Bill Bangham with my stories, to have good sequencing with my photos and getting better with my English also, because I write in French, I translate in English, and so I'm learning to be better in English. And yeah, it helped me a lot, encouraged me also.
Oh, that's good to hear. John Walton.
Yeah, when I was first starting out, I did a volunteer 1.5 short-term missions in the Philippines at Faith Academy. I was taking over for a teacher that was a photography teacher out there, Ken Kielbach. And when I started teaching that class, I found out how much I didn't know about photography. But fortunately, he left all his notes, all of his study guides, and so I had the whole year. And that's really when I learned it, is I stayed about 2 hours ahead of the students and went through his lesson plans, did the assignments, and then taught it. And that's kind of where I learned it. And it was his remote help by leaving his lesson plans for that year that helped me a lot. Get me grounded, you might say.
Oh, thanks. Allison.
I'm Allison Basie in Columbus, Ohio, and yes, Stanley and Jeff have both helped me learn about like storytelling and missions, and got me started on the whole South America trip that I went on.
Oh, thanks. Gibbs.
Gibbs Frazeur from Alpharetta, Georgia. Guy that I really owe a lot to is Bob Lynn, who used to be the director of photography with the Virginia Pilot Ledger Star. And back in the mid-'80s, I was a fledgling photographer who was desperately looking to rise in the business. And I had no business showing anybody my portfolio. It was absolutely disgusting. But I somehow located Bob Lynn. I don't even know how it happened now, but I drove down straight through to the Virginia Pilot Ledger Star, and he graciously gave me a tour of the facilities, and I was just my jaw hit the floor. I realized how much I was out of my realm. But one of the things he did was he encouraged me to go to graduate school for photography, for photojournalism, and also join the MPPA and start seeing what other people were doing. And so he was just pivotal in turning, giving me a break.
Oh, good. Mark Johnson.
A really, really long list of people to choose from. I'm going to go back to my first photo editor, which was Linda Epstein. Linda was the photo editor of my college newspaper my freshman year, and I started hanging around there, and she started giving me assignments. At the end of my freshman year, I had a meeting with her, and I said, I think I'm going to change my major to photojournalism, because I wasn't a photo major. And she said, don't. And I said, but I really enjoyed it this year. And she said, don't change your major. And I said, why? And she said, you're not very good. And I took that to heart. And I look back at what I did my freshman year in college, and boy, I was really bad. But Linda was the one who told me I had to work a whole lot harder if I wanted to succeed. I'm still friends with her 32 years later, so I think she was okay. So.
Ken Touchton.
Good morning, Stanley, and to everyone. Ken Touchton in Centreville, Virginia, about 20 miles outside of Washington, D.C. It's really, really very difficult to pinpoint one person, but George Hall, my chief photographer at the Chattanooga Times, handed me a bag of Nikon rangefinder cameras and lenses and said, here, take this. When you have a problem, come see me. And I did many, many times. And he nurtured me through those early stages of learning how to be a storyteller, or in those days we called ourselves photojournalists. But you know, it's hard to pinpoint one person, but Tom Kilpatrick and Ken Heyman, John Morris, these are Don Rutledge. These are the guys that nudge me along year after year while I move forward. So, but it's good to be here this morning.
So I have it as dodgeball. Go ahead with your name again.
Daryl Gomat. I'm in suburban Chicago, and there are many people, like you've said so far, that were influential in my career. But the first person I'd have to mention would be Tom Wallis, who is the chief photographer and picture editor at the first daily newspaper that I worked for in Ames, Iowa. And it was like boot camp working for Tom, because we worked 12-hour days. And one of the things he taught me is first clean up your background, and then compose your image with your subjects in your foreground. And I remember many times Tom looking at my film, which was black and white film back then, and he'd look through it all and go, great, 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 great idea, poor execution, throws the film in the trash, go back and shoot it again and do it right. And I just remember being devastated the first time that happened, but that really made me a better photographer. And I appreciate all the time that Tom invested in my life.
And Jeff Raymond.
I'm distracted being impressed by Phil's profile picture. I need a cool picture like that. Hey, yeah, you guys, you hit it on the head. It's kind of a hard thing. I come from a different initial background in the portrait world, and I had a guy that was basically on the national speaking circuit, so he's well known, but just took me under his wings. And he was a shooter for University of Michigan, so we would do games, we would do all kinds of stuff, and you know, he would rip things apart in a way that was defeating at the time, but ultimately beneficial.
Bill Bangham.
Well, I guess the one that really comes to mind is a fellow by the name of Jim Burton. And I was a newly minted magazine editor. I guess I'd been at 3 years, and I'd inherited a magazine that was photo driven. And I think we did a decent job with it, but Jim showed up, and Jim was a good photojournalist. Came out of Western Kentucky and had worked for Dallas paper and a number of others, Topeka, and so we came in to co-edit that magazine together. And Jim really became my mentor in photography. Interesting thing is that I was more of a writer and an editor than I was a photographer, and Jim was a photographer, so I mentored him in his writing and his photography. And the irony is that most people think of Jim as the writer today and me as the photographer. So we sort of mentored each other. It was a very special relationship. Jim just died last year. Really miss him. Really miss him.
Greg Thompson.
Hey, so the question is, who's influenced us or mentored us? Sorry, I joined a little late.
Yeah, we're just asking everybody, who was one person that mentored you that you can remember, or maybe something they told you? One tip.
Gosh, Stanley, I'm so old. And I've had so many people pour into my life. It's hard to come up with one. I was always a hybrid. I started as a shooter at age 14, but then I started writing some when I was 15. So I've always done both, where I've always produced projects with both. So my father was editor of the daily newspaper in my hometown. So basically just to shut me up one day, I was 14, he gave me a Yashica D and a Honeywell strobe and said, we could use some pictures from the junior high football games. You know, if you get any pictures we can use, we'll pay you $2 if we run one. I said, okay, that sounds like a good deal. So, and then I began, so my father really was probably the first one who got me started. Then I look back at my time at the Gannett paper in Nashville, and then I tell you, my 5 years at the AP was instrumental because I was the youngest person there by several years, but the people treated me, they didn't pull any punches. I could tell that they were for me, but they didn't let me get away with anything, both as writers, as editors, as photographers. So there were people who were authentic with me. They were tough with me, but I knew they were doing it to make me better. And I think that was really key. So it's hard to come up with one. I'm just sitting, all the stories are coming back in my head of, I don't want to bore you with war stories, but there's some pretty incredible stories of just watershed moments for me where it's like changed my whole view. Kind of like Mark Johnson said, when someone said, don't do this, you're bad. You know, you remember that forever, but I assume that what Mark is remembering is he had somebody who cared enough about him to tell him that, and then just didn't leave it at that. So that's really, I had lots of people like that, and I'm so blessed and so thankful that I had them.
Phil Wallis.
Well, actually, I am privileged to have one of those people on here with us, John Walton. So when I started back with one 20 years ago, John was also doing video and photo and everything, and we had another staff photographer. And so it was just one of those times when, like, I brought in my style, and John had his style, and the other John had a different photo style. And it was just one of those things where when you're acquiring the same subject, but you've got three different perspectives, you all learn from each other and seeing it in a slightly different way. Probably the other thing that's influenced me more recent was as I've been judging a annual Christian high school photo competition, it's made me kind of isolate issues and be able to identify them quickly, and then be able to articulate what's good, what's bad, and how at a fairly basic level, how to improve on those things.
Well, thanks everybody. I think I don't know about you, but I think we all can look back at people who've gotten us to where we are, and I've enjoyed the group as we each are learning from each other even today. So today I've asked Gibbs to kind of lead us off. So take us from where we are right now and help us learn something here, Gibbs.
Righty. Thanks, Stanley. Let me get my image up on the screen here. You can affirm whether confirm whether I've got it up there or not. So. Can you see that?
Not yet. You just hit the next, you have to pick the screen that you want and then hit share.
Oh, wait
like
a second.
Two-step.
So I'm not familiar with this process, I guess.
Go to share screen, then you pick one of your screens, your desktop or whatever, and then hit share.
All right. Thank you for your patience.
There you go.
All righty. Let's try that again. Can you see that?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes, we see it.
Okay. So again, some of you might not have been when Stanley asked how I was doing this morning, and I just wanted to apologize because I've been fighting insomnia for the past 2+ weeks, and Mr. Insomnia paid me a visit at all night last night. I finally got maybe 3+ hours of sleep. So my delivery may not be all that smooth, but I appreciate your patience with me. I got my photographic teeth in the newspaper business, and so a lot of my style and approach to assignments really is derived from those early years. And you know, I was asking myself, what is it I want to put up today? And you know, we're in that time period right now where the pandemic is affecting all of us so greatly. You know, we're really locked down, and there's not a whole lot we can do with ourselves photographically. And so one of the things I just wanted to talk about today was self-assignment. And I thought I'd show a couple of self-assignments here. I was gonna say 2, but there's actually 3. And I start with the first 2 images of a self-assignment that I did back in 1988. And, you know, racism is one of those things which is, has been thrust into our awareness lately. And so with that in mind, I wanted to share with you how I covered racism back in 1988. And Stanley, you didn't tell everybody, but I got permission from you last night that if people wanted to ask questions during the presentation, rather than wait for all the pictures to go, just feel free. I won't think you're rude to chime in and pop a question. I just wanted to change things up a little bit, just to encourage involvement. So this was taken at a Ku Klux Klan rally, and dear me, you know, I look at this young man. He was about 6 years old and sitting on his daddy's lap, and this was in Portsmouth, Ohio. And I was in graduate school at the time, and a bunch of us piled into my car and drove to Portsmouth from Athens, Ohio, and covered the Klan rally. Now the rally had been organized, being the opportunists that they were. The Klan saw a PR opportunity to get their faces, not so much their face, but their name in the media. And what happened was that a landowner had an issue with the Department of Environmental Conservation. I told you I missed some sleep. And so suddenly the Klans thought that they could ride to the rescue and bring this man's grievance before the public. I have no idea why they thought they would be the best way to resolve his issue, but he had a problem with his fish dying off, and he was good and mad. So the Klan put up posters all around the area, and you know, Klan rally, Klan rally, Klan rally. I think there were more photographers there than there were Klansmen. But nevertheless, I was looking at this picture yesterday, and I've had this picture quite a long time. And this is just before they they burn the cross. And I look, and just in the lower left-hand of that grouping is that little boy. And again, I think, you know, he's probably 36 years old now, if he's still alive. And you know, what was you know, what was he brought up with? You know, so that was how I covered racism back in 1988. So you know, we've had a lot of nationwide protests, and of course, Atlanta has you know, had its share of stuff going on. And, you know, you know, I've been watching Ben Gray's coverage. And by the way, if you haven't seen Ben's coverage with the AJC, it's just phenomenal. And then Pat McDonough with the Courier Journal. He's one of those guys that probably win part of a Pulitzer Prize winning team. But anyway, you know, it's when you see coverage and happening in your own backyard and you go, hey, it's COVID-19 time, we're in a pandemic. And I'm thinking, I probably shouldn't be out in that. And I'm kind of immunocompromised, being a Lyme disease patient for so many years. But there's a part of me that says, hey, this is a golden opportunity. And I just really want to cover it. So what I did was, with the encouragement of Gary Chapman, he said, get on Twitter and find out where the Black Lives Matter events are happening. So I got on Twitter and prayed about it because I really didn't want to get involved with the violent side of things. Although every protest has that potential to it. I noticed this event that was scheduled for Kennesaw. So I thought, you know, last minute thing, I'd probably get myself over there. But one of the things I wanted to be sure of was that I got an N95 mask because I didn't have one. So I had a emergency room nurse friend in our Sunday school class. She and her husband lived just close by. And I said, hey, you got one of those extra N95 masks? She said, yeah, I've got one for you. And I said, I'm going to cover the protest. I think she gave me kind of a funny look. But anyway, this was the start of the gathering of the people there. And this is a family. And I didn't really catch that daddy changed the world part until later. Had I seen that, you know, and really paid attention to what was in the image, because it was a fleeting moment, I would have asked them the significance of that. You know, was your dad a pastor? Who is the daddy that you're talking about? Is it a metaphorical daddy, actual daddy, or what? So anyway, this is the start of it. So in a sense, this is sort of, you know, this is over the top posters. And I realized that almost from the get-go, in a sense, this was going to be like shooting fish in a barrel. And, but you know, it was my barrel. And so I thought, you know, this is an exercise to do reps. You know, many times we wait for other people to initiate the work to come to us. And, you know, we wait for that call for an assignment to come. And I'm now going to be 65 this summer, and due to some health challenges and just tapering off of business itself, those opportunities don't come my way quite so much. But still the flame flickers within me to want to be able to communicate. And, you know, until I die, I have a voice. And so this is an issue that's really resonated within me. And so I thought, just get yourself there and then start shooting and see what comes of it. So, oh, the dreaded, there we go. So there were probably about 2,000 people, rough guess. It started out about a mile and a half away in a park from Kennesaw. And then the destination was going to be City Hall. And this was a very peaceful march. At one point, you know, there was a couple of F this, F that. But, you know, for the most part, it was just a really peaceful march. It was pretty chill. A lot of people wearing masks. In fact, I think they had a mask policy where everybody had to wear masks. I don't recall seeing anybody without a mask. You may see some of the pictures, but I just don't remember seeing any. But, you know, so there's two things going on here that I wanted to preserve for time, you know, later on, was this pandemic and, you know, our racial awareness, racism awareness coming about simultaneously. So, let's see.
Were you up on something on that, or did you actually just have your camera over your head?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, yeah, that was if I'm not mistaken, I flipped my LCD screen downward so that I could frame a little bit. I may have done some Hail Marys, but I think I was composing most of the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. So just over your head. That's great.
Yeah, thanks. So this is a little girl along the route, and she actually didn't have the sign. Someone came up to her, handed the sign. I thought, you know, that's a little staged. But then I thought, well, no, it happened. I didn't choreograph it. It happened. So now I want to get that, that interaction with, you know, those who were watching and how they were interacting with those who were protesting. And basically, you know, I took two lenses with me. It was a really hot day. The heat index was close to 90 or above. And, you know, I had one of those shirts on that just, you know, wick the sweat off. And I was just soaked. But I carried the 80 to 200 and the 17 to 35. I wanted to be immersive in the sense to get tight with, you know, my subject matter, but at the same time, I wanted the freedom to shoot from a distance with the telephoto and isolate backgrounds and, you know, compose that way too. Like I said, it was a really chill group. This young man right here, to me, just his sign says it all, you know, and this seems to be an issue that comes up a lot in the discussions, and people deflect and say that all lives matter. And, you know, quite honestly, this was about Black Lives Mattering too. So the police were there. Their presence was kind of low impact. There was a funny thing that kind of happened. At one point, I was approached by this, now I'm 6'2" and about 215, and this policeman who dwarfed me in stature and comes up to me and throws out his hand and says, "Good morning, how you doing?" Or "Good afternoon, how you doing? It's a fine day." Extends his hand, and I'm thinking, oh, it's COVID-19 test time. You know, I want to be socially isolated. You know, I'm trying not to get too tight to people, but it's kind of a contradiction in terms when you're photographing a tight group of people. I mean, really, in a sense, all rules have been thrown out. So I thought, split-second decision. Should I shake his hand or not? And I'm like, okay, yeah, shake the hand. And it was just a funny moment. But anyway, so here's the police. That police car wasn't a part of, wasn't driven by that guy.
Was it just parked there? I like the contrast between the police and the presence, the way you've got it close to the lens. You could really see police, but then you look at the signs and they really interact with them. You know, U.S. law enforcement killed 933. F-word, bad police. It's interesting, really good contrast and juxtaposition of in your image. It makes it way more powerful, and the young child in front. So it's cool.
Thanks. Yeah, it's one of those things. You know, whenever I'm on assignment, I'm hoping that I'm not using a template to photograph. I'm looking for, I'm praying and hoping for originality of content and composition. And this is one of those things where I thought, now where's my deficiency? Where's my deficiency? You know, it's the police, it's the police, it's the police. And so all of a sudden I walk into this intersection and there they are, they're blocked the intersection. And I thought, that's it. You know, it just, that was what I was looking for. And
were any of these published then locally?
No, none of these were published. I did put them on Facebook. And, you know, that's another one of the things that I really wanted to talk about too, was, you know, as you get older and your client list starts to trickle down, or as you go through a pandemic and your client list trickles down, you know, many times we're faced with that ultimate question, you know, what really motivates me? You know, is it getting published? And I know you're not suggesting don't shoot if it wasn't published, but that's a question that comes to me a lot. You know, what ultimately is causing me to get behind the camera? Is it an inner passion, or is it because somebody's called me or wants to publish this? So no, there hasn't been any outlet for this. And in fact, I didn't even attempt to do it. There's such a proliferation of really good stuff on there, on the web right now. I will say I probably was the lone photographer professionally at the event, but one can only guess today, what's published and what isn't. And this is a church group that had set up to pray there. It was a diverse group that protested. There was all kinds of people from all backgrounds, and but coming together. So this is a shot that I did. This took place in front of a Confederate store in downtown Kennesaw, and I haven't been in the store, but allegedly they sell nooses, and there's even a Klan uniform that's on display there. And so I guess if there was any one time where the protesters were kind of challenged with self-control, it was at the time where they stopped in front of this store and they were protesting with the owner out front. And several of the protesters had to remind others that it wasn't exactly a good message they were sending if they were, cursing at the store owner and doing other things. But
I think that's the store that Robin Nelson did a whole story on and Zuma Press released. So Robin's been doing a story on that owner for the past 30 years.
Yeah, it is, Stanley.
And you said that was with Zuma?
Zuma, but if you go to Robin Nelson's Instagram, you can learn a little bit more. And he did a whole article on the store owner. So juxtapositioning what you're doing with that, if people are interested, it's just an interesting story.
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate that because quite honestly, I didn't have a lot of background information. And, I've been around Atlanta for the last 22 years, but I wasn't really familiar with Kennesaw all that much. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And this is probably my weakest shot of the group. It's really an obligatory shot, but it beckons back to my Florida journalism days and, to make sure I get an overall. I just did not want to, I was already skin to skin with people, and, that didn't bother me except that we're in a pandemic situation, and, I just didn't want to wade into that crowd and work it too long. So I probably was already stupid enough being there as it was. But so that pretty much wraps up that. So the next thing that, and if anybody has any questions about just go right ahead.
Well, I was just wondering, what is your criteria for choosing to process all of these in black and white versus color?
Yeah, great question. So in fact, Bill Bangham asked me that the other day, a couple of weeks ago. So I'm being a former newspaper guy who, started with film, and specifically black and white film. I really still am drawn to the punch and the power and the impact of black and white. And so one of the things that I thought, I started going through the edit, and I thought, I wonder what these look like converted to black and white. And almost immediately, I had made the decision that was the route I was going to go. I felt like the confluence of colors was very distracting for the impact that I wanted to convey. And, we had orange hair, green hair, we had all kinds of colored t-shirts. And so I really wanted to just remove that as a distractive element, if that makes sense.
does it seem to convey a higher degree of unity, like in the terms of, because there's no color juxtaposition, you think?
I don't know. I mean, I'll leave that up to you. I mean, does it? I don't know.
I think it does. I think in one sense, nothing, like, you know, we're always drawn to highlight and color, bright color, right? So it kind of takes that away. But yeah, I think they're very powerful this way. They'd be very, very great.
Well, moving on from black and white to color and different self-assignment. And I want to differentiate between project and self-assignment. So these two things aren't projects. They're just self-assignments. And, you know, I'm probably not the best person to be talking about self-assignments, because I think as much as anybody else, sometimes I struggle to kick my own rear end and to get out there and pursue my passion to communicate. But there are those times where it's just an overwhelming desire to do it. And so last summer, the coming fair, and by the way, that's another thing I wanted to just talk about too, is, you know, I've been around different countries and around the States, but sometimes the most inspiring stuff for me is the stuff that's just relatively close by. And Billy Weeks, I don't know if you're still on here or not, but you inspire me. You really do. And you know, a lot of your coverages are local for your region, and that just really, you know, motivates me. It really serves to motivate me quite a bit. And so, you know, when I think about, well, I can't get here, I can't get there because of, you know, a client hasn't, you know, offered to fly me here, fly me there, or I can't go here or go there, then I think, well, what's happening, you know, that's relatively close to me? Because just because it's happening far away doesn't make it, you know, any more significant than what's happening local. And in fact, you know, if you're going to stay in shape, you got to do your push-ups. You know, you got to do them on a regular basis. And, you know, such as with self-assignments, they're like kind of like doing your push-ups. You know, you got to go out there and exercise your gift. And so one of the things that came along on my radar screen, and I've always wanted to cover it, was the rodeo up in Cumming, Georgia. It's only about 40 minutes away, and never covered a rodeo before. And turns out it's this particular rodeo was a very family-oriented affair. And this is the start of the rodeo. And, you know, it was a Christian rodeo too. Didn't pick it because it was that, just happened to find it out. And so they offered a prayer, and then they had this horse rider drive around. I told you I didn't have as much sleep. Ride around on horseback. And, you know, I thought, gosh, it just seems, even with my longest lens, the background's too busy, too crisp. And I thought, what can I do to change that, you know? And so I thought, well, I'll just pan blur it. So, you know, I tried very slow shutter speeds to try to finally pull that off and provide a sense of motion and also separation from the background. So it's thrills and spills is what it is. And when I got there, again, having never covered a rodeo, and also just having shown up, I didn't know where I should be in terms of proximity to, you know, where the best spots were. And I happened upon this guy who was a photographer covering this rodeo on a regular basis. And they go from location to location to location. And he basically took me under his wing and showed me the ropes, no pun intended. And so I followed him. And, you know, one of the things I realized right away was that I was way too high off the ground with my camera perspective. And so right away he encouraged me. He said, "You got to get down really low, real low to that, to the ground. In fact, you got to eat dirt." But he says, "Watch out, because these 2,000-pound animals will come ramming up against the fence that you're behind and looking for protection." Another one where they're not on these bulls long, and several of you I'm sure have covered rodeos, so you know what it's about. But it's it's just a few seconds. The best of them, these bulls are doing everything they can to throw that rider. And I didn't realize the danger of it all until I started shooting it. And the guy on the left obviously is one of those clowns that helps distract the bull once it's dumped the rider. And in a lot of cases, that rider's in a very vulnerable position when he's throwing it on the ground, because he either risks being trampled or he's already suffered impact damage from the throw. So this is a sequence. This guy's he's in a world of trouble, actually, right out the gate. He's losing his hat, and as I went through the frames, I could see that he had already started losing his balance almost from the get-go. So he gets thrown, and eventually he got trampled. And they've got these they're sort of like flak jackets on to help protect breakage in internal organs. But this guy was in a world of hurt. He put up a brave face, but they had the gurney out there waiting to take him away, and eventually he mustered enough internal fortitude to pick himself up. You can see the gurney sticking out here on the left side of the frame, and but that was a rough one. See that happen. So there's a near hit with the bull and the one of the clowns, and there were just so many frames I had where the clown just barely evaded the contact with the horns of the bull or the snout of the bull. It's a dangerous job. And here a bunch of guys flee to the safety of the rails. So this is a allegedly Guinness World Record roper, and did all kinds of rope tricks, and apparently holds the record for the longest length of rope put out on a lasso. It's fun to watch. And I went back the next day, and you're wondering probably why I got daylight and unavailable light. And I went back the next day, and still got the access I wanted, so didn't have to rack the camera ISO up quite as high as I had it the night before. And the women participate in several events, and it was fun watching them. And finally, just to wrap it all up, again, I said it's a family event. You see little ones starting out really early, and you know, around the horses. And this was a little parade that they had. And this little guy was on a pony as they were heading off, leaving the ring. So that's it.
Thank you, Gibbs. Any quick questions here?
Gibbs, have you considered presenting this story to a possible client?
Hey, Ken. You
How
know,
you doing?
I haven't. You're talking about the
Yeah,
rodeo?
the rodeo. You've got some nice shots. You could go back again and add some shots of families and get a little closer in with some of the cowboys, and could be a really interesting story for these modern times.
Well, I appreciate you suggesting that. You know, for lack of a better crisp response, I wouldn't be sure exactly who to approach for it.
Yeah, I mean it's difficult to figure that out these days. That's one of the things I've determined. But you know, if you dig deep enough into the lives of the cowboys and the lives of the families of the cowboys and the rodeo circuit, you might have a really interesting book here.
Yeah, and I had actually thought about pre-COVID time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thought about you know, following up and going to some other venues and, you know, being a little bit more intimate in terms of just, you know, happening upon the scene. I had made contact with the woman who runs the rodeo, and I think
Does she travel with the rodeo?
She does. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got a nice inside view there that you should really begin to investigate. And as we get over this pandemic and begin to find some normalcy in our lives, that would be a great self project.
Thanks, Ken.
Yeah. Along with that, yeah, if you're developing that relationship, do they have any like corporate sponsors or anything like that you might have snagged a logo or something prominent in one of your images that you could go back and maybe get one of those brands to kind of sponsor publishing or show, or maybe release through their social media or something like that?
Or getting funds to continue the project.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that I had to, in all candor, that I had to be respectful of, and probably still do, although I don't know where that relationship is the photographer who kind of took me under his wing and helped, you know, lead me around in terms of, you know, getting access. He, you know, I just want to be respectful of that relationship that he has with them, and not in any way think that, you know, there's a perceived threat of income.
How is he publishing? Where's his stuff going?
I don't really know. He's actually a Facebook friend now, and I know that he's his business has really been, you know, suffering. He's kind of was in the NASCAR coverage for a lot of years too, and so I think his sources are really kind of dried up. You know, welcome to the pandemic.
Yeah, welcome.
So one question I have is, when going back to your street shooting, about permissions, like people holding signs and stuff like that from them to publish and that, how do you handle that? Or do you just with people?
Yeah, so I just treat this as a journalism shoot, and if people are in a public place, in a, you know, public event, essentially I don't have to ask permission. but on the other hand too, if someone would say to me, I don't want my picture taken, you know, I obviously want to honor their wishes. That did happen with, I think, one or two people. And so just so that I knew that I wasn't treating them as, you know, photography only kind of object, I continued to converse with them and, you know, develop a relationship. But, you know, I just treat it like I would be covering a newspaper, because I'm not going to be using this stuff for commercial work where their image is going to be, you know, deriving, you know, secondary income. So.
Well, I tell you, Gibbs, those street images have a very strong historical narrative about them, and you need to find a place to put them. I'm not sure where, but we could discuss that again at another time. But, you know, America, the streets are alive, and we're going through this dynamic change. And so images like that need to be saved and in a location where future generations can look at them and say, well, this was the change. This is what brought it about. This is what happened. And I think historically, you know, we need to make sure that we're gathering up the changing times visually, because so much of the history that I've recorded on film has been discarded. It's gone. And I know, working with the Chattanooga Times, we photographed everything that happened. And as far as I know, all of those negatives have just been totally done away with. At Business Week, a lot of different organizations that I've worked with, when film went away, they discarded those files. It's amazing how many organizations decided that the negative files, the transparency, they weren't worth keeping. At least with the digital age, we'll be able to save and record things for future generations to actually be able to go back and look. So it's that your street photography is incredible. It's images that need to find a home.
Well, that's what prompted my question about them being, if they were published, not whether you have published them, but they were of obvious quality that someone else would have been attracted to them right away to see them and say, hey,
right,
this is different than what we normally would see from someone out taking pictures.
Yeah.
I agree with Ken. That's some of your strongest work I've ever seen. You and I have been friends for a long time.
You said you were trying to capture images that were kind of unique, and I think, like he's saying, that even that one, the police car, the signs, some of those images, some of the kind of the signs that you captured that kind of summarize the event, I think are very powerful. And you're always looking for those one image that kind of stands out that you can use, that summarizes things. So I think there's a lot of power in those pictures. And I guess that's the question I always ask myself when I'm trying to create something. Where is it going to be used? Because I have a big collection of stuff. My wife used to kick me in the shins when I used to pay a lot of money for film, especially for pictures that were not being used. And I think it's the same thing. What are we doing? Are we going to use, what's this benefit? How can we benefit others or make people more aware? So.
Yeah, and it's difficult to find some of the great film images that have a home. You know, old guys like us pass away and our families give our images away to the closest dump. So, you know, it's difficult to find a home for your images.
Well, it looks like, if nothing else, today's opportunity will enable me to reconnect with Kenneth Touchton again.
Oh, yeah. Good to see you, Gibbs. Good to see you, Gibbs.
Same here, Ken.
Yeah.
Same here, I know.
I want to thank Gibbs for presenting today and giving us some things to think about. And I want to, we don't have as much time as I was hoping to have at the end, but I want to transition just to a question that I've been thinking about, and this is just to inspire all of you to connect to one another in the group. But the thing is about mentors and how we can be mentors to one another, but also the mentors we had. And that's why I started with some of those questions at first. So I have two people I prompted on this question, but I'm going to ask this question. And then I have Greg Thompson and I ask Ken. I could end up asking Bill, but for time's sake, I'll just stay with the two of them. And so the questions that I'm asking them are, how did you mentor me? Because they did. And then what were the weaknesses they saw in me when I first started? And then, and how did you end up nudging me or mentoring me when and the reason I'm doing myself is I just want to give you a peek into what I think is important in the mentoring process of going to somebody, and you have to kind of initiate and ask questions, because I don't think mentors in general come along and they can say something to you like you need to, like Mark ended up with someone saying you need to get out of it. Maybe that was her way of mentoring. But Greg?
Not so sure. I think she just wanted me out.
So Greg or Ken, either one of you want to start and just kind of set that tone, because I think everybody can learn from that. You're muted there, Greg.
Let's see. First of all, I guess I didn't realize I was a mentor to you. I'm flattered, to be honest with you. The idea, to me, a mentor, it's one of those things you should never declare yourself a mentor, because a mentor is in the eye of the beholder. So I never strive to be a mentor. I found that being available is huge. Being caring about the person and about what they can become is obviously important. Asking a lot of questions, and they have to know that you are for them, that you are interested in their success and their achievement, and they also have to know that you are comfortable with the idea that they might and hopefully will exceed you. I've mentored a lot of people through the years. Apparently, they tell me I mentored them, particularly several women executives who, when we wound up, they were always they wound up outranking me, if you will, in the organization, and I was quite okay with that. So I think the ability to be available, if someone says, "Hey, do you have a few minutes?" Whatever you can, you do whatever you have to have that few minutes. They got to know you care about them before you start beating them up. And then you should beat them up in a way, forgive the beating up, you should rough them up or challenge them, is a better way to say it, in a way that is edifying and they know is for their own good. And then you need to look for opportunities to tell them that, hey, I see this gift here. With Stanley, I mean, you asked me, it's a very embarrassing question, Stanley. You asked me, what were your weaknesses and all that kind of stuff. Well, God, Stanley was a complete disaster. I didn't have anything to work with Stanley. He was just a mess. No. Stanley is one of the most gifted people I know. He's gifted, he's unique in so many ways. And fortunately, the Holy Spirit, and I do credit the Holy Spirit here, gave me that knowledge and that information. So it was not hard to work with Stanley because he has so many strengths. And I think Stanley has told me through the years that I spotted strengths in him that either he didn't know he had or that no one else had said those things about him. And if that is the case, then that's God. I'm not that smart. But I think it's just being open, authentic, available, and ask a lot of questions is really key to it all. It's not any harder than that, and it is as hard as that. I was asked last weekend to spend time with a group of young Canadians, Koreans and Canadians that I had met through doing some nonprofit work. And they just asked would I talk to them or answer questions. And the answer is always yes. Then the question is, how do we make it happen? So that's really all I would say. Be available, be supportive, and be authentic.
Yeah, Stanley, and it was always easy to work with you over the years because we were just good friends, and you would always have questions, and you would come forward and ask about this and ask about that. And I realized that you were searching and you were looking for a future in this crazy business. And I remembered all of the individuals who helped me through the years. And I remember some of those folks would tell me as I advanced in my career, don't forget to pull people forward. Don't forget to help others because, you know, you're not where you are because of your own gifts and talents, but because other people gave to you. So as photographers have asked me questions and come along in my life, I've always felt the need to pull forward the generation behind me. It's just important to give forward and understand that everything we've learned from others who have mentored us. So one of the exciting points about working with Stanley is the fact that he was always extremely knowledgeable and had gifts in areas that even today he far surpasses what I'm able to do and accomplish. And then he, at the same time, wants to move his photography and his imagery forward at the same time. And that's pretty exciting to see. And, you know, I think that God has given him special gifts, and I know that he is mentoring and he's pulling young people forward. And to me, that's the special gift, is that we continue to work with others and to pull that generation forward, because all of us, you know, are in this business, we have a calling, and we feel like, hey, you know, we're visual communicators. The strongest have a visual storytelling capability that has a narrative, and it's the narrative that's the most important part of the variable of visual storytellers. So, you know, working with Stanley was very easy, and it's always been a lot of fun. So, and it was fun, especially back when he was working with the International Mission Board in Richmond, because he was just an hour and a half away, and I could always go in and have lunch with Don Rutledge and Stanley and different ones, and all sit around and converse and learn from each other. So, you know, the whole mentoring process hinges around a saying that says, the first person served by servicing others is yourself. And that's what it's always been, you know, as you mentor and serve others, it comes back to you.
And I think it's important too, those are great words, Ken. You said it better than I did. I think it's important too that you share, you know, I mentioned being authentic. I think that's the key really, is share your own struggles. You know, my definition of wisdom is accumulated scar tissue. And, you know, in my old age, I'm trying to learn from other people's mistakes, not my own. But I do know that the stove is hot because I put my hand on it. I've got the scars, both in life and in work. And so being authentic and sharing about your own struggles. And then I think something that a mentor, I quote mentor, does is perspective. Is a lot of times I find with people that I work with, I'm trying to lift their vision, and I'm trying to lift their eyes off the little Gordian knot they're trying to untie, and I try to lift their eyes up to the overall thing that's going on and how this fits in it, what matters and what doesn't. And so I think perspective is really huge. But I don't want to leave the, I'm sure all of you right now are writing my nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize, and thank you for that. But when I turned to Stanley, when I met Stanley, I desperately needed help. I was looking for a tool. I was looking for somebody to help me in the situation I was in. And I spotted in Stanley, and the Holy Spirit helped me spot a uniquely gifted person who I did not even know how uniquely gifted he was. But I needed help, and I turned to Stanley, and it's kind of like, okay, Stanley, here's a rifle. They're coming over the wall. Let's figure out how to do this together. And that was how we got together. And it really does kind of come as a shock, and I'm flattered, but that Stanley would consider me a mentor, because I considered Stanley the highest compliment I can pay somebody is that they are my professional colleague. And I grew up in the newsroom, and to me, we are colleagues first and foremost, and then we sort out who's the editor, who's this, who's that. We all sort that out. And but colleagues are people you stand shoulder to shoulder with. You have mutual respect, and that's what I told all the young people. My job for the last 10 years was to mentor and grow a function at Chick-fil-A, and I had to work with a lot of young people. And I told them, guys, first and foremost, you're my professional colleague, and then we move forward from that. And apparently that's rare in a corporate environment when somebody says that. I did not. To me, that's the only way you could work. So I don't know if any of this is helping you or not, but that's kind of just some general thoughts.
I'm going to ask one last person to kind of chime on this, and then I'll let that be kind of the closing out for us. Bill Bangham, I didn't ask you about this, but you've been doing this for me for years. What is it that is the mentoring? You've done that for me through the years, told me a bunch of stuff.
Seriously?
Yeah, you have. So what are some things that you have tried? Because I think we do that, and what I'm starting to see, and I think Greg's kind of alluding to it, we see things in other people's lives that we just go, hey, you may want to know this before you do something. Mm-hmm. And I don't even think we realize we've done that to our friends. And they've done that for us, and you've done that many a time for me. So what is it that motivates you in that way and helping other people? You've done that for me too, not just for me, but for others.
Well, I'm kind of like Greg here. For you calling me a mentor is really kind of a strange thing, because we've just been friends and colleagues and people who share a passion and a calling, and maybe we rub up against each other, sort of iron sharpening iron, as I've heard other people say in the past. But I don't know, you just meet people, or at least I do, that are just worth it to invest your life in. And it kind of comes back, there's those that have invested, their lives in you, and there's no way you can ever pay that back. Some of them, some of the most significant people in my life are long past, and yet the influence they had upon me, 50, 60 years ago continues today. The only way I can pay that back, and I feel there is a debt, that you incur in those relationships, is to invest those in other people that you just kind of say, this one's worth it. This one's worth spending time. And maybe that's not even a good way of saying it. It's like, this is someone I want to spend time with. And maybe I have some things to share, and if I do, that's a wonderful thing.
Well, I feel like that I try to be open to whoever God puts in my path, and I believe everyone deserves honor, dignity, and respect. And if God puts somebody in my path, I try to be open and available. I figure they're there. I'm not a Calvinist. I don't believe it's all predestined, but I do believe in divine appointments. And I feel like if God puts somebody in front of me, I will try to make time to spend time with them, because there's probably a reason they're there. I feel like God has told me, pay attention to what's going on and who I put around me. I don't know if I can tell this story without, I don't know if I can get through this story without choking up, but I'll tell you the story. I got a gift from the Lord a few months ago. There was a guy who was my first boss when I went to work for IBM. He was a former UPI journalist, and he had hired me into IBM, a former AP guy, and we were trying to learn the whole corporate thing. And he taught me how you care for and lead people. I just didn't know how to do that, and he taught me that. He was just incredible. And then we went on, and we didn't see each other for a while. We kept in touch, but so I go to Chick-fil-A, and my job is to do that. And I kept thinking about all the things he had taught me, and I began basically channeling him. So Bill and Ken, he was one of those guys we talk about who did it for us, but you never get a chance to pay them back.
Yeah.
So a few months ago, this could be hard to say, he was on his deathbed. And I had just retired from Chick-fil-A, and I went to see him. And I don't care how good a friend you are with somebody, it's always hard to be with somebody when you know they're on their deathbed. And this is like, what do you say? What do you do? This is somebody who's meant, I mean, this guy was in my wedding 36 years ago. I mean, and he wanted to know how I was doing. And I just blurted out, I think it was from the Holy Spirit, that, I just had this retirement party, and I was embarrassed. They said all these ridiculously nice things about me, and these things that I didn't even realize I had done. And I told him, I said, I want you to know, Dallas, that you couldn't be there for that party because you're sick. But I wanted you to know that everything they were saying about you. Because every time I would hear these things, I would reflect back to the way he was and the way he taught me. And so I had that rare moment, that gift, where I could actually tell someone on their deathbed of the impact they had had. So anyway, I just throw that story out. Hopefully it inspires you, because it was just one of those moments where the Lord has given you a gift. So please forgive me if that sounded boastful. I'm trying to boast in the Lord, not in myself.
I think I learned, we mentioned his name a lot. I think I learned probably the most about mentoring from Don Rutledge. And back when I was editor of the Commission magazine, and I only got to work with Don for about 8 months before he retired. But Don would bring these people by to my office, and I want you to meet somebody, and maybe we could go out to lunch together. Okay, and I'd look at that work, and I'd think, why in the world do you want me to look at this? I mean, this is awful. This isn't anything that we that we want. And yet Don would drag me into this situation. I'll be very candid. As an editor of international or a magazine that has the opportunity of people sending people overseas, you get a lot of attention every week. A lot of people banging on your door, and I became rather dismissive. But Don would bring these people in, and then they'd show up again a few weeks or months later, and the work had changed, and what happened, and I realized it was the investment that Don had put into these people, pretty much like he did with Stanley and me and Ken and a lot of other people, that you just never know who someone's going to become. You just never know. And if you can help, you can put a hand out there and help in some way towards their becoming. I think that's part of our calling as broad calling as Christians. I think it's part of grace.
I never met Don Rutledge, but I feel like I would have to list him as one of my mentors, just on things I've studied about him and the stories that you and Ken and Stanley and others have told me about him. And I mean, he had great work, and I learned a lot of photographically about Don, but it was really more, I probably learned as much about mentoring from what you've told me about Don Rutledge. So I never met the guy, yet he has mentored me on the subject of mentoring. And again, when I see Don, when I hear those stories, I say, here was a guy who was available. He was not dismissive. He knew that every person was worthy of his time and effort. And he knew that God was working on them and that they could become something greater. Whether he saw what they were going to become or whether he just knew they were going to become something like that. Either way, he acted on it. And that has always been very inspiring to me. And I never met him.
From what I understand for myself, I think people who have been editors, people who look at a lot of pictures or know what those photos work, like the story, the narrative, are able to put things together. I know my photography changed dramatically when I was having to go through the editorial process rather than shoot. And it completely changed me because I realized how much stuff I had to throw out that didn't work, that wasn't really that good, could never really be published. And you start looking at that. So we're actually working with somebody who's got a good editorial eye on stories, narratives is imperative. So I think a lot of these people can look at it from a different angle than the shooting side of it, being out there and doing the work and look at what you're producing. And I think that's the kind of input that we need to give to others. And I might say I've been neglected that area in my thing. I think sometimes I've looked at people as being colleagues, but not given the real input into their photography that they probably could have used to help them grow. And then you kind of look at it, like I'll put out all these photos and theirs are not chosen. And I kind of go like, it's a shame, like they just don't come out every time we do these edits. And I think if I'd done more work, I could have helped others. So there's some things for me to reflect on here. Good conversation. Yeah.
Well, like I said about perspective, I hate to break this to you since you're all excellent photographers, but the photography doesn't matter. Photography is just, it's part of the process. And I said that to be deliberately provocative, but it's bigger than your photography. Yeah. There's a bigger thing going on. What Gibbs did in Kennesaw, there was a bigger thing going on. There was a bigger context, not only for the story, but there was a bigger context of what's going on in Gibbs's life right now. That he had the strength, he saw in the strength to go out and challenge himself to do that and get some of the best images maybe of his career when nobody was telling him to do that. And then there were people there who were hurting and angry. And then there was Dick Myers, the guy at the Confederate store, who's an interesting guy. He's an interesting guy to just sit and spend the afternoon talking to. He's a little nuts, and I like little nuts. But he's not a bad guy. So there's a bigger thing going on there. And what I think I learned from Don Rutledge was it's not just a picture. There's a story happening here. These are people, and this is their life, and this is what there is going on in their life. And this is how that life sets in the larger scope of what's going on spiritually. And it's a big deal. I mean, I think of the Don Rutledge picture where the guy is sitting in the bedroom and he's dying from like lung cancer or black lung or whatever. And his wife is sitting there and you can see through the door and something else is going on in his house. You guys all know the image. I'm not describing it well. Yep. But he was telling me in that picture, there's a bigger thing going on there. So context to me is huge. Context and perspective of what's really going on. And Billy does a terrific TED Talk where he talks about, well, I think it's, and I'll butcher this, Billy, forgive me, but there's three people in every portrait. You know, there's the photographer, there's the person having their photograph made, and then there's the audience viewing the portrait. Did I get that right, Billy?
Well, yes, that's actually stolen from Ansel Adams.
Well, anyway, so I heard it from you, and it was great. So.
Yeah, that's a very famous quote from Ansel Adams. But honestly, Ansel Adams photographed landscapes, so
he didn't do people.
Well, he tried, and it didn't work out too well for him. And then he tried something different, which is really, if you think about it, it's how all of us get to be successful. Is we try and we fail and we do something different, and then we move on. And I really appreciate you mentioning my TED Talk. I usually don't talk very much about that, but
I thought it was good.
Thank
Me
you.
too.
I appreciate that.
More importantly, it gave me perspective that I had never thought about or seen. I didn't know about the Exiles quote. He was a terrible photojournalist, by the way.
He was not successful at that, and when paired with other great photographers like Dorothea Lange, he failed miserably, and she was incredibly successful at it. But in his own world, he's the most famous photographer probably of our time, which is something to think about also. But you know, I often think that, and if you listen to my TED Talk, I talk a lot about photographing myself and my work, and I think the work that I see in the rest of you, and today what we've seen from Gibbs, I think has been a good example of that. We photograph ourselves. We're in our pictures, and even though we're not physically in the photo, you know, if we're not bringing something to that photo, it's a failed image. And I used to, as somebody mentioned earlier, I used to send photographers back all the time to reshoot pictures, and they would get very angry at me sometimes, and I'm like, I don't care. I mean, I need for you to be in that photo. I need for that story to be told in a way that's fair and just, and I need for it to move me somewhere. Dave LaBelle talks a lot about how photographs are about feelings and how we feel about them when we see them, and I truly believe that successful images have a good bit of that, a good bit of feeling in it. You know, you look at it, and I put my perspective on your photo. I think that's so incredibly important to us. There's a reason we push the button. There's a reason we make that photo. And, you know, only your background is going to be important to play a role in that decision. You are the first editor. Never underestimate the power you have. And thanks again, Greg.
This is not just about photos, guys. I want to raise your eyes up from just pictures, because I probably did more and was more successful as a writer and editor than I was even as a photographer. And you see the same thing with writing, with reporting, with everything, is this idea of what's the larger thing that's going on. It's a famous story. In fact, it's a co-worker of mine, Stanley's, Ken Willis, when Richard Nixon came out of exile and made a speech somewhere in Georgia. I think it was his first speech since he had resigned. It was it was a big deal that he was making a speech. Well, Ken worked for the Atlanta Constitution, and Furman Bisher was a famous sports writer for the Atlanta Journal. And the Constitution sent Ken to cover the speech by Richard Nixon. And weirdly enough, the Journal sent their head sports columnist to cover it. And Ken's like, this is crazy. I'm a news guy. He's a sports guy. I'm going to kill this. Well, Ken goes up, and Ken said he came back and he covered the speech. Here's what Richard Nixon said. There were 2,000 people. It was a nice speech. Bye-bye. Furman Bisher covered the experience, the overall story of the exiled, disgraced leader who came out of exile. He was almost Shakespearean the way he told it. And Ken said, he kicked my ass. I mean, forgive my language, but it was Ken, who was an experienced journalist, covered the facts. Furman Bisher killed it by setting it in the context. And I think that applies whether it's photography, whether it's video, whether it's articles, whether it's however you tell that story. There's something bigger going on here than just the facts of what you're being presented with, I believe.
When I would send writers and photographers out on assignments, I would often say to them, I'm not sending you out to take beautiful photographs. I'm not sending you out to write an incredible story. I'm sending you out to form relationships, and out of those relationships, the images in the story will come.
That's terrific. Billy Weeks taught me some of that when we were working together in Haiti in 2010. You remember the debate we had, Billy, about, you know, as a former AP shooter, it was like I would knock my own mother over to get the shot. And then, you know, being a follower of Jesus, I'd come back and help her up later after I filed the shot, but I would knock her down. And you and I, we had that big debate when we were going down for earthquake relief about, do you get better images getting the image, or do you get better images, get to know the people first and then shoot the image? And I was very one-dimensional in my view of that 10 years ago, coming from the AP perspective that says I'm going to be able to file one, maybe two photos. And Billy taught me. I mean, everybody on here, literally everyone I know well on here has taught me something valuable. I mean, I can think of stuff that that Jeff taught me when we were in Dominican Republic together back in the late 2000s. I mean, 2008 or 9. And all of you guys have taught. So that's where the iron sharpens iron, which comes out of Proverbs.
Yeah.
Greg, that was a very humbling trip we did together.
Yes, it was.
Very humbling.
Well, I think you guys have just stumbled into why I like doing this group.
Well, thank you, Stanley, for setting it up. You have a unique heart and a unique gift for service. One of the reasons I hired Stanley was I was having all kinds of issues explaining what I was trying to get done. I just I needed some pictures, but I needed some other things too. And Stanley, I found out in doing my research, was the guy everyone else calls for help. I mean, all these great photographers that I knew would tell me, yeah, Stanley's the guy I call when I'm having trouble with that or ask questions about that. So that was one of the tiebreakers for me, is this is the guy everyone else calls for help. And so I want this guy around.
Well, as Henry Ford said when he was being asked a question and being on trial, he didn't know the answer. And the person says, see, you don't know what you're doing. He says, but I can get you that answer. And you guys are the reason I can get those answers, because I can call each of you when somebody asks. I can honestly tell you this has been the best one so far that we've had for me, because you guys are all starting to see why it's so important to sit around a table and have coffee with some people and just ask a few things and bat some ideas around. And this is really one of the biggest things that I've learned from each of you. Every one of you has said something to me, Allison included, and Julie. You've all done things that have spoken into my life. So I hope that as you go this week, that you continue to reach out and realize when you're just talking to somebody, you're speaking into their life, just by even taking the time to give them your 2 eyes and your ears and your facial recognition of them in front of you, or listening to them on Zoom, whatever. It's amazing how big of a deal that is, just being listened to. And you guys have all done that for me.
Well,
So
and
next,
I'll make you the same offer that I make everybody else. If this young man from Korea asked me if I was available last Sunday afternoon, I said, look, I'm retired and I'm in quarantine. What else have I got to do? But even when I was busy, I tried to be available. And anyone on the call, some of you I don't know at all, if you flatter me if you ever wanted to ask my opinion or my insight on something, because I'm shocked that you would want that. But I will make time. That's the deal I have with God, is if he brings me somebody, we're going to find the time to do it. So if anyone, some of the people I don't know well, if you want to talk further one-on-one, I'm happy to do that. And I'm sincere in making that offer.
you'll be surprised. My wife discovered something a few years ago. She knows 10 times more people than I do. I do not know how she knows all these people, but one of the things she pointed out one time was she created this Facebook group called Thank a Journalist. And she said, if you just read a story and if it moved you, if you just write thank you in the subject line, and send it to a journalist, she says, I can guarantee you they probably got no other thank yous ever on that article. And that opened up the door to say that's how she built relationships, is writing people and saying, thank you for what you said. And I can tell you that if you wrote to anybody here at any time during this week, anytime we do these things, if you're the person who writes and says to Gibbs, thank you for your presentation today, and then speak about a certain moment or a photo, I can pretty much guarantee you nobody else is doing that. That's not a normal thing. So take your time, thank people.
I agree. And I learned, you asked who mentor, I learned a lot from Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A. I worked for Truett for about 8 years, and he profoundly affected my life. And one of the basic things he talked about was, he would ask the question, how do you know if someone needs encouragement? And then the answer to that is, check and see if they're breathing. If they're breathing, they need encouragement. And that little comment probably has done as much to change my life as anything in the last 15 years. So to echo what Stanley said, everyone needs encouragement. I used to have a boss who mentored me, but he was not a Christian. He was a pretty hard-edged guy. But one time I was railing about this person, how awful they were totally worthless, and why are we having to bother with this thing? This was 25, 30 years ago. He said, Greg, nobody's completely worthless. And I said, no, of course, this guy is completely worthless. And he said, no, Greg, this guy's not completely worthless. If nothing else, he can serve as a bad example. So it's a funny comment, but the fact of the matter is, Truett has taught me that everybody is a child of God, and they all deserve our time. And they certainly all deserve our encouragement. So echoing what Stanley said, absolutely, encouragement and availability is huge.
Any other last parting comments?
Well, this whole thing's been super encouraging. I'm just sitting here taking it all in and trying to figure out how in the world, Stanley, we can bring all these guys on the next trip, and we can just sit and keep this kind of dialogue. It's good stuff.
Fix the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Cure the COVID-19.
I'll work on that. Tomorrow's a holiday, but I'll start on that on Monday, Greg.
Yeah.
I put a link to Billy's TED Talk in the chat room. If anybody
Good. Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's really worth watching.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, Billy, I admire the fact you had the guts to do a TED Talk. I think that's awesome.
One of the scariest professional moments of my life.
Yeah,
and I followed the Hall of Fame impressions as they were singing "People Get Ready," and they did their TED Talk, and then they sang "People Get Ready," and I'm like, oh my goodness, the world's going to end, and I'm going to be on stage. So
hey, when Jesus Christ is riding shotgun, you can do anything.
Yeah, I agreed.
But boy, he puts us in awkward positions. Some of the young people I spend time with, I don't really give them any advice. I just ask them a lot of questions. But one of the pieces of advice I will give them is, get as close as you can to Jesus and buckle your seatbelt, because it's going to be a wild ride, but it's going to be worth every second of it. So you clearly were buckled in on that one, having Jesus there with you. It was terrific. Really good job.
Thank you.
Any other parting comments? I want to thank all of you for being here. And next week we have, I just went blank here. Daryl Gourmet. I don't pronounce his name right. How do you pronounce it, Jeff, his last name? Do you know Daryl?
Gourmet.
Gourmet.
And he's with which Regular Baptist? Do you know anything about that, Jeff?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah. Daryl's a great photographer. Regular Baptist does a lot of curriculum and Sunday school materials and things like that, but he also works, it's kind of a sister organization for their magazine, the Baptist Bulletin. So, and he's done that for a number of years.
So look forward to seeing him next week, and we'll have some other people I'm trying to line up. And then the week after that, we have Michael Alexander presenting, which it's taken me 20 years to get Michael to talk. So I'm thrilled. It's a moment I've been waiting for. Well, I'll see you guys later on. And if you have
Thank you, Stanley. Thank you, Stan.
Thank you.
Appreciate
All right.
it. Thank you. Thank you.
And
Bye,
be
guys.
sure you
Thank
go to the chats and download that before we get out, because that'll allow you to save the chats if you want that, or at least get the link.
Those
We
kids are,
appreciate it.
Hey,
Have a good
girls.
they're
day.
big. They're
Bye.
big, Phil.
Good days.
They're big.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I've learned with kids, if you feed them, they get bigger.
You don't feed them, they get louder.
Well, my wife does not like the idea of not feeding them. She won't let me get away with that. Hey guys, it's been great. We'll look forward to it next time.
See you next week, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye
So long.
Bye, Julie.